Great, thanks for that intro, Karen. That was great, and hello to everyone. It's good to see you all and see so many people here. As Karen mentioned, I was assisting with the museums as we closed, opened, and hopefully we stay that way for a good long stretch now. I'm just going to put a bit of a slideshow up on the screen. Here we go, that should be working. Right, so we'll get straight into it. We've got a fair bit of info to cover. And as Karen said, if there's anything we don't get to, if there's any questions we aren't able to answer today, we will make every effort to make sure we put something up soon with a response. So as Karen also mentioned, with COVID, things do change pretty quickly. So the restrictions that we're currently under, it's anyone's guess whether they'll remain the same when the actual history of festival events kick off. So today, rather than focusing on the real specifics about the current restrictions, we're going to focus on a few things that we know are going to be with us in some shape or form when the History Festival events do start to happen. So we're going to look at the COVIDSafe plan, the COVIDSafe check-in, physical distancing, capacity limits and hygiene, and COVID marshals. So those are four things that I'm pretty confident will still be here when we have the History Festival in some shape or form. So it'll be good to talk some more about them. And then I'll go over what we do if the restrictions do change. So we're just being prepared and where you can go for that extra bit of information, because as I said, the situation today is unlikely to be the situation that we're in down the track, though fingers crossed, or it may be better. And then we'll just do a little quick Q&A. Okie doke. So we'll start off by talking about the COVIDSafe plan, what it is, why you need it, how do you get one, and we'll actually talk as well about I'll actually go through the COVIDSafe plan with you, where to find it and how to submit it. It's actually a really simple document and it'll help you out a lot, as you'll see throughout the presentation. I'll be constantly referring back to it. So it is a really good a really good resource for us. I am reading some notes off the screen, so if I do pause and stare at the computer, at the camera, that's what's actually happening. So the COVIDSafe plans, these are a requirement for us. It's spelled out in the directions that we're following under the Emergency Management Act. So there is a requirement for something called defined public activities to have a COVIDSafe plan. So there's a definition for what defined public activities are, which includes the provision of public entertainment. At the History Festival, we've also made it a requirement for registration that all participating hosts will submit we'll make sure that they have a COVIDSafe plan. So that's why we're talking about it today. So the purpose of the plan is to provide you with the information that you need in order to be compliant with the regulations that are current at the time of your event. It also provides a lot of really useful extra information, such as extra recommendations and extra precautions you can take to make sure your event's really COVID safe. It's important to know that it doesn't replace a risk assessment, which is something that we would encourage everyone to do. And it isn't a COVID management plan. So I'm just going to chuck a little box here. So there is something called a COVID management plan. That's a very thorough document. So that's the document. We've only had to do one at the History Trust, and that was when we did the Beta Birdwood. So it's a very complex document. It's very thorough. It needs to be created in consultation with SA Health, and it needs to be approved by SA Health. So you can see there the benefits of the COVIDSafe plan. It's an automatic approval with the COVIDSafe plan. You go online, submit the details, and you'll instantly get your approved COVIDSafe plan back. It only takes a few minutes to complete if you've got all the information ready up front, but it does not have that thorough risk assessment element. So you should be doing that separate to the COVIDSafe plan. So it is very unlikely that any of our History Festival events are going to need a COVID management plan. Here's just a little bit of information about currently who needs one. As you complete your COVIDSafe plan, and we'll have a look at this and I'll show you an example, you'll be prompted if you do need to complete a COVID management plan, and that's something that you can work with SA Health on. I think it's quite unlikely, but it's worth being aware of it, and I'll show you some more details when we go into the COVIDSafe plan example. So how do we get one and how to complete it? I'm going to switch my screen share. Okay, hopefully we're all seeing Google. So I thought I'd start from the first step. So if you need a COVIDSafe plan, go to Google, type in COVIDSafe plan, South Australia, hit enter. We'll also have links available, or we have links available. We'll make sure you have that too. So the first link, open that one up. And you're brought to a page. It gives you some details about who needs a COVIDSafe plan and what it is. If you scroll down to this little section here, how to create a COVIDSafe plan, and the blue button on the bottom right, this actually takes us to the form. So we're going to have a quick look at it. You fill out this first page, name of your business, details about who you are and your contact details. There is a section here on the screen, hopefully you can see, where it wants you to, I'll see if we can zoom in, where it wants you to select your business activity. So this is this is a newish feature on the plan where you can actually select multiple categories. So the importance of this bit here is when you say what sort of activity you are and what sort of things will be covered at your event, it gives you very specific obligations that we have to comply with for the event to be COVID safe. So if we're having food at the event, or food and drinks, we may want to include hospitality. You can do unlimited or multiple categories. So choose all that you think will apply. And you'll see here there's a little prompt, do you wish to host more than 1,000 people? If you say yes, it's going to tell you that you'll need a COVID management plan. So for the majority, as long as we're keeping our events at under 1,000, you're unlikely, but please do make sure you check it as you go through. So say we're doing a hospitality event, which is seated entertainment. So we're sitting down. As you go through, you fill out your details, hit the next button. It takes you to the next screen, which talks about your venue capacity. Now, currently we're working under 1 person per 2 square meters, and this is both indoors and outdoors. You'll write in whatever it is, room 1. You'll say how big the room is in square meters, and it'll automatically tell you the maximum amount of people you can have, excluding staff, in that room. So it gives you that information straight away. It's there, and you can use that. As you go through, it'll take you to the next section, which is about our obligations. So this is the real key part of it, because this is the stuff that we absolutely have to comply with. So this is the information it's the most up to date. It's come straight from the determination. This is the bit that we need to comply with. And as you go through, you'll see, I'll scroll down the bottom, so there's some general compliance information. It's really interesting. So once you do your own read through this, and you'll know where you stand and what you need to do. So you'll have to tick it off to say that you agree to comply with it. And then hospitality. So because we selected hospitality as a category, it's going to tell us some extra stuff that we need to do with hospitality. So questions about consuming food, communal beverages and food services such as buffets and whatnot are still closed, things like that. So they'll tell you what the requirements are. And then there's additional requirements again for the seated entertainment, because we clicked on those 2 categories. The next section is recommendations, and this gives you some extra really good information that you can choose to apply, but you don't have to. It's very good, but it's not mandatory. Essentially, then you get to the bottom, click through, and the document will send away, and you will get an email with a PDF version of your COVIDSafe plan all ready to go. So I'll just bring this slide back. Cool. So it's really quick. It's actually really quick to do it yourself, especially if you already know the size of the venue or the location that you're going to be at, and it just gives you heaps of really good information. What I will also do actually is bring up one of our COVIDSafe plans. So your COVIDSafe plan is also the way you get your QR code, which is, I think, the next bit that we're going to cover. Yeah. So the COVIDSafe check-in, what is the COVIDSafe check-in? How do we get the QR code? What to do with it? And a couple other little questions there. So it is called the COVIDSafe plan with a capital S and a capital A for SA, so that's not a typo. So from the 1st of December, all defined public activities were required to have contact tracing details collected through this approved method. So the reason that, so at the moment, one of the main ways that we're doing that is through these QR scanners. And the reason that this has come about is we've seen not just in South Australia, but around Australia, when we've had an outbreak or a cluster, it's time is of super vital. So the most important thing to get on top of the cluster is our contact tracing, having really accurate contact tracing. And to do that well, we need timely information about where people have been, so we can track where a close contact has been, who their close contacts are there, who might be their casual contacts, that sort of thing. So what we found previously, not just in South Australia, but around Australia, is where we've had multiple methods of collecting this information. When we have a cluster and we need that information really quickly to help track down the contact tracing, it's coming in all sorts of different formats. So business one may have their own QR scanner set up with a third party, and business two may have a piece of paper, and business three might be doing it on the computer. And so SA Health are trying to get this information as quickly as possible, and they're running into issues with, people not knowing where the forms were placed, or if they're using a QR reader from a different organisation, they don't know who to contact to get that information sent out to them. They don't know where they're being kept on site. So all of these things, solvable, but it causes a delay and it takes longer to do the contact tracing. So as a solution, the South Australian government created this COVIDSafe check-in app or QR code system, which works with the SA Gov MyGov app, and it allows SA Health to access information about check-ins as soon as they need it. So if we have a cluster that is identified at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, they don't have to start trying to call businesses when people aren't going to be there. They can access their database and go, okay, there was a cluster at XYZ business. These are the people on their QR scanners that were checked in on the relevant areas. We can contact them tomorrow. So it's a really useful bit of defence for the COVID response for SA. So once you submit your COVIDSafe plan, you'll get that back as a PDF, and on the front page of that plan, you'll have, on the second page of that plan, you'll have your own unique QR code. You would have seen them around as you've been out and about, but it's designed like a poster that you can print out and put up around your business or around your event. The QR codes themselves can be read by multiple apps. This example on the screen here is the MySAGov app. And you can see you download it there, hit the COVIDSafe check-in, you get a green tick, and we know that people have checked in. It only takes a few seconds. So once you've had your COVIDSafe plan come back and you've got your poster, what do you do with it? So the idea is to put it up in, make it as accessible as possible for people to be able to use it. So most people are used to looking for it when they enter a store or enter an event, and then when they exit, they're also kind of used to looking for it. But if you've got things like if you're doing a sit-down event, consider putting them on, like printing them out, laminate them, pop them on the tables, things like that. So the more people can see them, the more likely they are to go, oh, whoops, I forgot to do that when I walked in, or the more likely they are to go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to make sure I do this. If you need to, depending on who your clientele are, you may want to make a nice big poster so people can be sure to see it when they come through. Now, a really good question that comes up is, what if you're hosting an event at a venue that already has a QR code scanner for that venue? So for example, at the Torrens Parade Ground where I am today, we have a QR code that's for the Torrens program that all the staff and visitors use when we come to work. So if you're hosting your own event inside one of those venues, what's the best course of action? So it is a really good question, and it does sound a little bit, it's an interesting question. So if your activity meets the criteria of being a defined public activity, it requires you to use the COVIDSafe check-in, which includes the QR scanners. So even though you already maybe at a venue with a code, you should also have your own code and your own check-in or your own check-in methods for your specific event. And the reason why we do that is it still provides some really good information to SA Health. So one of the features of our current check-in system with the QR codes is that we check when we come into a venue or come into a shop, but we don't scan when we leave it. So the system doesn't know if we were there for 5 minutes or if we were there for 5 hours. So using this for our specific events, we have our own check-in code. It means that if your event runs until 12 p.m. and then something different starts at 2 p.m. and there's an issue with that second event, SA Health will know that your event, the people that went to your event, were out before there was a potential risk of exposure. So there's some really good reasons why we do it. But it's a very good question that does come up. Now, if you have people who are unable to access, so there's a lot of really good reasons why people won't be able to use that QR scanner, as great as the system is. So it could be that where your event is, you don't have internet access. It could be that the people that you're expecting to come to your event may not have access to a smartphone or may not have that technology. So there's loads of really good reasons why people may not be able to use the QR code system. So what we can do then is use this paper records. So paper records, there's a template, which I've got on the screen there. That's available at the SA.gov website, and we'll make sure that there's links to that available. You print that off, fill in the information, and just ask patrons to use that if they're not able to sign in with the QR code. So the QR code is preferable because it gives SA Health that information instantly. But if they're not able to, keep this form available and register people as they come in. It's really important. There's a few points I've put on the screen there. So the records need to be kept for 28 days. That's because that's how far back, if there was a cluster, that's how far back they need to look to try to track down close contacts and casual contacts. So it's really important that with this information, while you're storing it for that 28-day period, you're holding on to it, number one, that it's kept securely, because it does contain a lot of private information. And number two, make sure it's in a place where if SA Health need it, we know where it is. So if you've got a safe, chuck it in the safe. That way, when they come looking for it, we can give it to them as soon as possible and help speed up the process. Now, I've highlighted in red down the bottom, it's really, really important for everyone to realise that this contact tracing form can only be used for contact tracing. So it's only for SA Health. It's only to provide to SA Health should they need it. We can't use it to collect email addresses for our mailing list. If we want to do that, we need a separate form. We can't use it to call people and say, oh, look, you've left your glasses here or something like that. It's only for SA Health when they request it. And as of yesterday, they actually have made some stricter penalties around the misuse of that information. So, and I've just popped that up there for interest. But the important thing is to make sure that the information isn't used for anything else, and we should have no problems. Another really great question that comes up is about what happens if people don't want to sign in. So we've given them the QR code, we've got the paper form, but they're choosing not to check in. So we've got an obligation to do all that we can to encourage people to check in. So having lots of posters around is really good because it shows that it's something that we think is really important. We can tell people ahead of time that to expect that they'll have to check in. So if you're doing an event that's got tickets or that you're booking for, you can put it in your event details saying, please note, we're going to have the check-in and we're looking forward to seeing you when you come through. If someone's initially refusing, it is worth having a conversation, just seeing what they're worried, like seeing where their concerns are coming from. Are they worried about their information going into the QR reader and they don't quite trust that? Then, you know, we've got the paper version available and you can explain to them your process with the paper version. Or if they don't trust the paper version or don't want that laying around, you can explain how the QR codes work. So there's the first step is really, or if they just don't understand the technology, in which case it's really great to be able to help them and walk them through it. So that's the first step if someone is choosing not to sign in. Ultimately, we all have a responsibility as citizens in South Australia that we should do our best to try to check in as well. So if a person is refusing, you can ask them to leave. We absolutely 100% do not want anyone physically trying to apprehend or have any conflict with someone who doesn't want to check in. We can ask them to leave. If they don't leave, then that's up to your event and your organisers to decide what you'll do in that situation. And it's really worth sitting down with your event organisers and your committees or whomever it is and saying, what will we do, so that you guys are all on the same page. So you know that if someone comes in and they won't scan, they won't check in, we're going to ask them to leave, or we're not going to ask them to leave, we're going to do this instead. Whatever it is, make sure everyone's on the same page there. So you are able to, if they won't check in, you can ask them to leave. You can call their, say, COVID hotline for some advice. If you need to, you can also call SAPOL for advice on the day. So something to be aware of and definitely worth the discussion. Okay, so first two. Now, distancing, capacity, and hygiene. I shortened this so that the title would fit. So we're just going to talk about social distancing, room capacity, how we encourage social distancing, and then some hygiene tips briefly. So as we saw earlier in our COVIDSafe plan, it will tell you what your maximum capacity is once you put your room sizes in there. Note that this is a maximum capacity that you're allowed. You may choose to do a smaller capacity if you like. If you do your COVIDSafe plan and it comes back and say you can have 400 people at this event, and you look at, you know, the resources that you've got, and you think we can't safely manage more than 30 people on site. In reality, you're well within your right to change the capacity for your own event to be under that maximum capacity. Obviously, you just can't go over. Now, so at the moment we have got a capacity of 1 person per 2 square meters. There's a possibility that may change in the future. So make sure in the lead up to your event that you are double checking your most recent COVIDSafe plan and making sure that you've got the most accurate information. So there'll definitely still be distancing requirements, and capacity requirements, but the details of them may change. Encouraging physical distancing, social distancing, spatial distancing, it's all the same thing. It's basically making sure that people who don't usually hang out with each other keep a good distance apart. And essentially that's because they've done lots of studies about how far, so one of the ways COVID spreads is through infected droplets. And so when you're talking to someone, how far those droplets go there's some science on that as to why we're doing it as a 1.5. So they think that within 1 meter of a person, the heavy droplet should be hitting the floor by then, and then they've whacked on an extra 0.5 meter just to be super safe. So this little bit of information I've got on the screen here is straight from the recommendations section of your COVIDSafe plan. So when you're thinking about how to encourage this physical distancing, have a look at that COVIDSafe plan, go to the recommendations section after you print it off, and read through and think about how you might be able to apply some of those principles to your own specific event. Great, sorry, I'm just reading through my notes again. Yeah, so there's things like, obviously signage is really important, and I think we've got links to where you can find some good signage that the government have pre-prepared, so you can just print it off and stick them up around your event. Things such as floor markers are really helpful to help people. It's a visual cue of where to stand when they're waiting in line. So you'll see it yourself as you go around. If there's an area that doesn't have the doesn't have the crosses on the floor or the stickers on the floor, people do tend to gather a little bit too close. So these are all things that might be possible. They're not mandatory because obviously there aren't all situations where we can use a floor marker, you know, especially if you're on a walking tour. But there's some really good advice in there. Hygiene. So I've included hygiene in this little section. I'm not going to go into the details about how to wash your hands and all that sort of gear because most of us are well aware of it. And there's already some really good stuff out there that I'll point you to later on in the session. But it is, so these little tips that have come here, these come from, again, the recommendation section of your COVIDSafe plan. So depending on what your event includes, depends on what sort of mandatory hygiene obligations are there. So there may be some, so if you are having food at the event, there are some mandatory ones about the way that you share the food. So you can't have shared utensils, things like that. So make sure you list when you're picking your categories, everything that covers your event, and then refer to that before in the lead up and as you're planning. But it is, yeah, it's always really useful to have good hygiene at your event regardless, and definitely refer to the recommendation section of your COVIDSafe plan to get some good ideas about how you can apply it to your own event. Okay, so now I've just jotted down just a couple of examples. So each event's going to be really highly individual and you're going to have some really specific needs for your own event. But just looking at some of the list of things that might be held, I've got some general ideas I thought would be good to sort of put forward. So things like a walking tour, ways that you might be able to promote a COVID-safe environment on a walking tour is look at the size of the group that you've got. So maybe make it a smaller size so that there's enough room within the group for people to be safely distanced from the other people that they're not usually, that they don't usually associate with, and safely distanced from the rest of the public as you're walking around. If you've got like a session where you, like a crafting session or something like that, providing individual packages instead of sharing materials, you know, make sure there's enough of whatever you need for each person and then sanitize afterwards. Galleries, things like that. If you've got a display or you're having a standing function, think about the pathway or the flow that people will take as they walk through and look at everything. So it might be that you put some markers on the floor to say, go this direction, that direction, rather than people going back and forth and crossing past each other. And if you've got like a sitting event, make sure that the tables are 1.5 meters apart, or make sure that the seating's arranged such that there's enough spacing that people can get some distance. So those are just a few sort of ideas to think about. Okay, COVID marshals. So I do believe that these will still be around until the emergency declaration finishes. So what is a COVID marshal? So a COVID marshal is someone who's had some training in a few, which I think I bring up later, but someone who's been trained as a COVID marshal is there to help make sure that that the organisation, so that your event is complying with their obligations in the COVIDSafe plan, which is a bit of a complicated way to say it. But what a COVID marshal is not there to do is to hound people and to individually, you know, follow people around and rap on the knuckles. It's basically there to make sure that we've got the tools in place so that people can be safe when they're at your event. So who needs a COVID marshal is a good question. This is something that as you go through your COVIDSafe plan, you will get prompts if they think you need a COVID marshal, and it will say, you know, you've marked that you're serving food, you need a COVID marshal, or it'll say your event might need a COVID marshal. These are the reasons to have one, or the requirements to have one. Just as an example only on the screen is what the current requirements are as of today. So these are the type of events that would need a COVID marshal. Keep checking as you get closer to your event, because this may change. They may up, they may lower the threshold. So yeah, keep an eye on it. But I'll give you some more information now about how to become a COVID marshal. So the training is actually really super simple. It's really interesting too. So it's free. It says it takes 30 minutes, but it really doesn't. It's much quicker than that. So it's a free online course. At the end, you get a certificate that you print off. Make sure that anyone who is a COVID marshal in your organisation does print off their certificate and keep it somewhere safe. These are the sort of, so this is just an example of the login screen. And these are the sort of topics that it includes. So it talks about what COVID-19 is, how it spreads, et cetera, et cetera. So it is quite useful. If your event does require a COVID marshal, make sure that you have the certificates kept somewhere so that if an inspector comes on and asks to see them, you're able to show them to them. That's important. Even if your event does not need a COVID marshal, you're still able to have them on site. Like you're absolutely more than welcome. And it's encouraged for you to have your staff trained or your volunteers trained with this COVID marshal training. It's really good, and they can they can display their badge on the day and say that they're trained as a COVID marshal. So you're allowed to do it even if you don't have to do it. It's a good thing to do. They do, there's me and Debbie, so they do recommend that you display or do something to indicate that you are a COVID marshal. So you can see we've got these very discreet yellow, or discreet bright yellow, very small little badges that we have for some of our museum officers to wear. And Debbie, who works at our reception, our front desk, so she wears that one when she's doing COVID marshal. This one here that I'm wearing, it's actually a bright purple History Trust vest that is the one that I wore for the Beta Birdwood when I was COVID marshal down at the Beta Birdwood event. So you don't have to wear a bright, flashy, bright orange vest saying COVID marshal. You can do it with a small little name tag. You can do it with a, one of those, like on a lanyard or anything like that. It's just so that if someone who's at your event wants to speak to a COVID marshal for whatever reason, they know where to find you, they know who to talk to. But it doesn't have to be a big, flashing red light on your hat or anything like that. Okay, so next bit is about the restrictions. What do we do if the restrictions change? So look, it's not easy. It's not always easy to stay up to date with COVID-19 and what the restrictions are. They are changing constantly. These little screen grabs on the screen there, the 2-page not founds, they were links that I found today while putting together some information. So it is hard for even the official government websites to keep up with all their links and with all their bits and pieces. And as things change, as our understanding of the virus changes, as we get new variants, such as the ones that are coming out globally recently, as we get through our vaccination program, there's all these things that will change our obligations and change what our requirements are. And you can see here, I've put up a little snippet from the Emergency Management Direction. So that is the piece of legislation that basically informs all of our restrictions. So that's the Holy Bible, I suppose, of what we need to do. It's proper legislation. It's really wordy and it's hard to read through and decipher, which is why we've got this really easy to read version, which is the COVIDSafe plan. But you can see it says public activities number 19. So since March of last year, so that's less than 12 months ago, we've had 19 different directions and each different direction has changed rules, has different rules. So you can see that it's changing all the time, which I don't think at all is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing because it shows how current we're staying on our response. And it shows that we're not sitting on old restrictions because they're easy. If we can ease them, we're easing them. So it's not a bad thing at all, but it does make it difficult to stay on top. So from a compliance perspective, which is what we're talking about today, from a compliance perspective, the best way for you to stay up to date is to make sure you always read your COVIDSafe plan. So I think I forgot to mention this earlier. So you fill out your COVIDSafe plan, you get it as an email. When this public activities direction changes, when the emergency management direction changes, you will automatically get a new version of your COVIDSafe plan, and it will tell you in there these underneath the obligations what's changed. Like they'll outline the current obligations. So you don't have to go do anything. You just wait. You'll get your email. Make sure you read it, and you go, oh right, I see. This is what we need to comply with in order to be compliant. So that's the best way to stay up to date from a compliance perspective. So if you don't often check your emails, maybe in the lead up to the event and while you're planning your event, it's definitely worth opening them up before any of your meetings and just go, okay, we haven't had a new COVID safe plan. We're still working on the same principles as the last one. To stay up to date, if you just in general, if you are looking for a bit more information and you don't want to just wait for the COVID safe plan, Facebook is turned into a really good resource for as a channel for a lot of our official information. So most of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with Facebook, and most of you should be familiar with this blue tick. So this is something that appears at the end of the name of an account. So I'll show you some examples. And basically it indicates that this person has been verified by Facebook to be who they say they are. So it's an official channel. So you want to make sure if you are following any advice from Facebook that you follow advice from official government channels is the safest way to do it. So these are three that I keep my eye on. Stephen Marshall, the Premier usually does the update, and those are attended by Professor Spurrier and Grant Stevens, and that's usually where we hear the most up-to-date information. So they do live updates. If you are someone who follows along with some of those, you'll notice, you probably won't notice because you don't watch the legislation in the background, but you'll see that they'll announce what the new changes are, and then they have this team working intensely in the background to update that emergency management declaration, and then that evening, later that night, we'll get the updated COVID safe plan, because it does take it's proper, proper legal documents, so it takes a lot of time for it to filter through. So keeping an eye on these is great. I recommend you follow them, and when they do a live presentation, you get a notification and you can watch it and see in real time what's happening. But ultimately, just make sure you're following your COVID safe plan, and you won't go wrong. These are some other official websites that that are great to keep your eye on. Always look for something that's got the .gov.au at the end, because then you know it's information that can be trusted. And we'll have some links available. We do have links available, and keep those up to date. Now this one, if you're watching this and you've got a pen handy, make sure you jot this down, and we do have links to it as well, but this is, these guys are great. So this is the SA COVID-19 information line, and it's just a really fantastic service. So they're there, they give advice about COVID-19 for people. You're also able to access this service to get some advice on your COVID safe plan. So when you're going through your COVID safe plan, and you might go, look, I just don't know what, this is my event, it doesn't fit any of these categories. Give them a call, explain what your event is. They will be able to help you to complete your COVID safe plan as well. So if you've got any really quirky questions or really specific things that you want to talk through about COVID, these guys are absolutely great. So make sure you get that number written down. They're really good. Great. Okay, so now we're looking at risk assessments. So a risk assessment in general is an exercise where you look at, say, an activity or a task or an event, and you think about all of the possible hazards and risks that might be associated with that activity. Look at the controls you've got in place currently, and then you can decide, do you need more controls? So as a process, it's something that people do all day throughout the day. If you're going to go out, if you're going to cross the road, you actually do a little risk assessment in your own head where you look at the situation, you go, that if you cross the road, there's a hazard, you might get hit by a car. So you do your little assessment and you go, okay, there's not a lot of traffic, or I can't see any traffic, or there's traffic lights, or there's lots of traffic, so my assessment is I won't cross. So risk assessments, we do them all the time, but we don't always put them down on paper. So it's actually really a really valuable process, and a well-prepared risk assessment can save you a lot of time at the other end of your event. If you put the hours in at the start, or the minutes in at the start, it saves you a lot at the end, because you'll end up identifying things you didn't realize. And so it's always way better to identify those little quirky things at the start than when you're halfway through planning and you realize that you need to make some changes. So for example, if we're doing an exhibition and we're having a look at an exhibition's design and we go, this looks fantastic, this design is great, let's go for it. And if you don't risk assessment and you put it together and you get halfway through, you know, you've put the exhibition and then someone looks at it and goes, oh, there's this great big ledge there, which is a trip hazard, you know, something like that. So if you'd identified that sort of thing at the very start, you can look at it and go, okay, from a risk point of view, there's a risk here, let's change the planning, and it just saves heaps of time down the end. They're super useful and they're done well. So the History Festival website, we have a couple of COVID-specific risk assessments here. We'll quickly touch on them. The first one is the hazard identification. It's a template that I developed that we actually used at the History Trust before we reopened our museums. So this is not quite a risk assessment, it just helps you thinking, okay? So the idea of this is to break down every part of your activity, your event, and think about where there might be hazards and touch points specific to COVID. So this is only COVID, this one. And as you're thinking it through, it just helps you look at the whole event with that lens. You're more likely to find things. So there's a little example in here about the activities around the front desk and the customer interaction. So that was the chunk that we've broken it down to that we were going to focus on. And we've identified these are the sort of hazards, these are the controls, et cetera, et cetera. The other document we've got is actually a risk assessment template. It's a lot more, it's a proper risk assessment. It's essentially the same form that we use here. It is pre-populated with a few things, so you might find some value, even if you don't use this exact template, you might find some value in having a look at it. So I'd recommend you check that out. Here's just one example from it. So the hazard we've identified is COVID-19 spreading through touch points, because it can, obviously, if you get a droplet on your body and then you touch your body, then or from someone else, and then you touch yourself on the face or whatnot, you could spread that to yourself. So in the example document that's on the website, there are a few different things to consider, and they'll be listed as the hazard, the task, and then down in the comments section or over in the comments section, I've put in some suggestions that you might be able to make work for your event or your organization or your function, depending on what it is. And remember, customize these as much as you can. There's no one right answer. It's all very specific in everyone's events. Even if we have two identical, even if we have two events that are essentially the same thing, they're still going to be very unique depending on where they are, the time of day, who's coming, that sort of thing. So I won't go further into the risk assessment process today. I think it's a really valuable process, and and actually going through it is a really beneficial thing. If there's any interest, I am happy to come back and do a session or put some more information about risk assessments in general on another time. But just on the COVID side of things, if you open up this document, it will give you some good ideas. Another place to go to that's really useful for risk assessments is, again, you go back to your COVIDSafe plan and you go to the recommendations, and you'll get lots of really good ideas there about what you can do. Great. So the next bit was Q&A, and I'll throw to Karen there if you wanted to let me know if we've had some questions coming in.
Yeah, we have. Thanks so much, Amber. There's a lot of really useful information in there, I think. A couple of the questions that we had come through before the session, I think, have been covered. So we had a couple of general questions about whether or not people need a COVIDSafe plan. So hopefully we've answered your questions there. If you have anything really specific you'd like to answer, pop it in the Q&A now and we'll try and get to it. One specific question we had about COVIDSafe plans is whether if the organisation already has a general COVIDSafe plan, do we need to write another for these purposes? And I think maybe you did actually answer that a little earlier already. So just to reiterate, you do need one for a specified activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Because depending on the activity, again, the activities are generally condensed into certain time periods. They are only visiting certain areas, so it gives them more. It gives SA Health more information. And if you've already got your COVIDSafe plan the first time around, you already know the dimensions. It's super easy just to pop that in, and 2 minutes later, you've got your new COVIDSafe plan with your own specific QR code.
Great, thank you. We've also had a couple of questions about food or drinks, and I think you covered off this when you were going through the COVIDSafe planning process, and there's some information in there. But do you have any sort of COVIDSafe general recommendations for people when serving food or drink?
Yeah, sure. So currently, as I said, definitely check back. If you're going to be having food at your event, I'd recommend you include or consider including hospitality in that little drop down box of categories, because that'll give you all the food and drink specific information. But basically think about how the aim of so without trying to we're trying to stop the spread of the virus. So we want to cut down any of those touch points where multiple people are accessing the same thing. So from a food perspective, we wouldn't want something like a buffet where everybody grabs the same ladle and uses that to put on their separate plates and things like that. So if you're going to have food that's in a buffet style food, we'd want it so that there's only a staff member can access it. So maybe the people come up and say, I want the potato bake, and then the staff member will put it on the plate and hand the plate over, rather than people helping themselves. If you just have if you usually have snacky foods like a cheese platter, an alternative to consider is things like little individual packets of snacky food. So maybe individual packets of peanuts that are on the tables, or individual packets of chips or whatnot. So it's just, again, rather than everyone sharing from that same bowl and potentially sharing our germs as well as our chips, think about it from that point of view.
Great, thank you. A related question, but less on the food and drink side of things. Heather is asking, should any objects be touched? So I think that's in the museum context.
Sure. So this is a really interesting one. So from the COVID point of view, we want to minimise shared touch points. So so at the History Trust, we've got a few education programs, and this is one of the questions that comes up there. So I guess the answer is, it depends on what the object is and how it's handled. So if you've got an object that's really easy to clean, and that isn't going to be damaged from the cleaning process, and that you're able to clean in between visitors. So for example, if you've got a touch screen, so we've got lots of touch screens at the museums. So those are really easy to clean. And so we have our touch screens open. So we know that people are going to use them. We have next to the touch screen, every touch screen has a sanitizer station with some hand sanitizer. So after people access the touchscreen, they can sanitize their hands, and then we make sure we include that in really regular cleaning. If you're talking about collection items like objects, make sure you really consider what the object is made out of. So some things we just cannot sanitize easily. So things that are made out of material that need to go in the wash, that may damage a collection object, especially if it's like a official proper collection and not a reproduction. So you want to make sure that whatever people are touching, there's a way that you can clean it and disinfect it without damaging the object. Something that you can consider, and it depends on your specific. If you've got a session that happens once every week, and there's a 7-day gap between the sessions, even if it is something that maybe is material, as long as the virus can only survive for a set amount of time on different objects. So if you have got cloth as part of your event, and people are handling, or a person is handling the cloth, and then it gets put away and doesn't come out again until the next week, maybe that's an acceptable risk. You have to look at it in your own context, but that may be a way around it.
Great. Meredith from Mount Horrocks has asked if there's any specific considerations for outdoor events.
Yeah, so outdoor events are considered safer because one of the ways that COVID is spreading, and you see this in all the Medi-Hotel outbreaks and whatnot, in many of the Medi-Hotel outbreaks, for example, is through aerosols, which are these small particles that are released when you talk, when you sing, when you yell, and they just float around. And so outdoor events are safer because of these. I can't think of any specific restrictions that will apply to outdoor events. Currently, they're considered, I can't think of anything that's specific. So it's if you've got an alternative where if you're looking at an indoor event versus holding it outdoors, if you can hold it outdoors, it's a safer way to do it. So if you do have something that can transition to outside, obviously taking into account things like the weather and whatnot, that's actually a safer path.
Great. One final question, just quickly. In the chat, Robert's asking about a new ruling, I think, that came in yesterday about collecting
information from the QRs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paper check-ins need to be done on individual bits of paper as of yesterday. Have you heard anything about that?
I don't know about the individual bits of paper. I must admit, I did watch the live update, but I haven't had a chance to read through the newest determination. So I'm not sure on the individual bits of paper, but I'll follow that one up because for example, we've got a different process here where we don't necessarily do individual bits of paper for them. We do use that sign-in sheet, which is still available, but I'll check that out.
Okay. And we can share that with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to mention as well, two quick things. Gloves are not a good substitute they're not a substitute for washing hands and good hand sanitizer practices. So try to avoid incorporating gloves into your risk assessment. And a question that I forgot to bring up before is what happens if there is a COVID-19 event associated with your site, and how to plan for that. So essentially, if there is an event associated with your site, you'll be contacted by SA Health, and you follow their guidance basically. So that's just good to know for your planning.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amber. I think we'll have to leave it there because we're just about on 5 o'clock. But thank you so much for sharing your information with us today. If anybody out there has more questions, just send them through and we can see what we can do about answering them or sending you in the right direction. And please do check our resources page on our website because we've got some links on there that should be helpful for you while you plan your events. We'll continue to monitor the situation over the next few months as we get closer to the History Festival. And we'll keep in contact with everyone and let people know if anything changes and how we're going to respond. So please make sure that you don't unsubscribe from our emails and check them regularly as they come through because there might be some important information in there. Again, thank you, Amber, and thank you, Liz and Britt behind the scenes for your help today. If anyone out there has any suggestions for future webinars, that would be helpful to send them through to us, and or any resources that might be useful to you, and we can always follow up on that. Yeah, don't forget registrations are closing on the 1st of March. We look forward to receiving your registrations, and we're looking forward to a great History Festival. And thank you all for coming again today.